Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Rogan. I am the school social worker at East West School of International Studies. I am recording this parent workshop at the end of January in 2025 in preparation for doing the live workshop with a group of parents. I wanted to record this, publish it to YouTube, so that way folks who either can't make the live session or for parents who speak a different language, you can access this recording using the closed captioning and the translate function. So I will show you a quick demonstration about how to do that, about turning on closed captioning if you need it. The first step is to click on the CC button at the bottom of the YouTube video. Then you'll see this settings icon. You'll click on subtitles and then you'll click on auto translate and you will scroll for your language. And you should hopefully see the translation and the closed captioning for you there. There's also ways to adjust the font size of the closed captioning and the speed. So feel free to play around with it, but these are the basic instructions. So the agenda for this workshop is to really focus on obviously puberty, crushes, and autism. And when I do the workshop live, we have some community agreements and an icebreaker. We're going to talk about what does sex positive mean. We're going to obviously talk about puberty. We're going to talk about crushes. Very importantly, we're going to talk about consent. We're also going to talk about how declarative language and autism can really help support you having this conversation with your children. We're going to talk about sexual health and mental health. And then obviously I provide a ton of resources throughout the whole workshop, and I'll have time for questions at the end. And as this is recorded, I have my email. So if you do have questions, feel free to email me as well. So again, these community agreements are more so for the live workshop that I'll be doing, but I did want to take a moment to highlight this last one, this lean into the uncomfortable feelings. I know for a lot of adults, talking about this subject can be really awkward and make us feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. I just want to kind of name that as we go along. Again, this icebreaker is for a live activity, but the point of the icebreaker is to really make sure that you all know that you are in this together. As parents, we have a lot of shared experiences. We do a lot of the same things. We have a lot of the same thoughts and feelings, and we sometimes make the same mistakes. And I just wanted to kind of warm people up to that you're not in this alone. So the first slide here I have is for what I call tips for a sex positive conversation. And these are some of the most basic tips that I wanted to start off this conversation with. So you really want to remove any shame from talking about bodies, talking about crushes, talking about sex, talking about what we want as human beings. This is a very natural and normal part about being a human, and there's no shame in it, number one. The other thing that I really want to encourage is that if you haven't already, you want to start these conversations early on when your child is small, obviously at an age appropriate level, but talking about consent, talking about boundaries is not something you have to wait for them to be a teenager to talk about. We can talk about saying yes, saying no. When do we ask for consent and when do we give consent? The other thing that I'm really going to stress throughout this workshop is using appropriate language. I know when children are small, we tend to use language that might be cute or might make the conversation a little bit more comfortable for us. That might be okay in the moment, but as your child gets older, you really want to use the proper terms to talk about our bodies and to talk about sexual activities, because especially for children with autism, you really want to be very clear with them about what some of these social rules might be. So much of this is unspoken that when we do speak, we really want to make sure that we're using the right terms. You don't want to overwhelm your children with information, so I really recommend finding pockets of time where this might naturally come up. Maybe you're watching a television show or a movie, or maybe there's a video that comes up or a song. So always look for those pockets of time that might naturally come up to broach the conversation, and do it in small chunks of information. And then, of course, we really want to acknowledge and discuss all the way that sex happens, and not just limiting it to heterosexuality, because that's really going to close off a lot of the conversation that might still need to happen. Whether or not your child identifies a particular way or not, you really want to have as much of an open mind about sex as you can. Okay, so puberty, the real fun one. The most important thing to take away when thinking about and talking about puberty is you really want to normalize it. Everyone goes through puberty at a different age. Some start, really early. Some might be late bloomers, as we say, but everybody goes through it. And the most important thing to teach our children as they enter puberty and as they're going through it is how to manage it and be independent. And again, you really want to acknowledge that puberty is not only physical, how to manage a child's physical changes with menstruation, getting your period, having acne. With boys, you really want to think about, they're going to start having erections, they're going to start having wet dreams. You really want to start thinking about what's physically happening to their bodies, helping them manage that physically, but then also acknowledge that there's a lot of emotional changes. The moods and the mood swings, you're not making those up, those happen. There's also feelings, sexual feelings, attracted, people they get crushes, as we'll go into the next slide. And so there's just this wave of changes that happen over this period of time, and it's a lot. And so it's really important that we be as direct and as straightforward, but without having any shame in it. For girls with their periods, you want to take any shame out of shopping for tampons and pads. You want to normalize, this is what I do, or this is what your mother does when she has her period and goes into the bathroom. She might bring a small purse with her. Or, if boys are having wet dreams, you really want to acknowledge this is normal. This happens to your body. You don't have too much control over it. But okay, so you wake up and your underwear or your pajamas or your sheets are wet. Like, this is how you change your sheets, and these are where the new sheets are. And let me show you how to make sure you know how to make your bed. You really want to take any shame out of it and be very matter of fact about, this is what happens to our bodies. And these are some of the things that we can do to help you become an independent young person. There's some other phrases that I would recommend. About just being really matter of fact about, body odor, about shaving, things like that too. Planet Puberty is linked here for a lot of these topics. They have a wonderful website with a ton of resources in there as well. Okay, crushes. As I said, crushes are a big part of puberty, and they are when people are attracted to other people. And as children get older and develop crushes, sometimes the crushes can be kind of an emotional or a social crush, like they just really enjoy that other person. And maybe it's a person of the same sex, maybe it's a person of the opposite sex, maybe they just really admire them, want to be around them. And then obviously other crushes are when they have a physical or a sexual attraction to them, right? And describing what a crush is to a child can be really helpful in empowering them to then describe it. Talking about your body might get warm, and you might get a tingly sensation. Maybe you might get red in your cheeks when that person walks by. Maybe you find yourself staring at them and you don't realize you're staring at them. Maybe you actually have the urge to touch them or hug them or kiss them. All normal and all healthy, as long as they're not bothering you, and certainly as long as they're not bothering the other person. But crushes are very, very normal. We all have them, and even as adults, we continue to have them. And the most important thing is to help your child manage them in a very healthy way. The Organization for Autism Research is another great website, and I have linked here a little quick video about public versus private that I'll play for you.
Knowing how to act appropriately in different situations can be challenging, especially when certain behaviors are considered appropriate in some places but not others.
You are expected to know what is considered appropriate behavior in public and private places, even though you may never have been explicitly taught, or even if the social rules change based on different cultural or social groups. Behaving inappropriately in any social situation can lead to small misunderstandings and embarrassment, or sometimes something worse that has legal consequences.
It can be hard to understand, but there are some general guidelines one can follow to determine what kind of things can be done in private versus public settings.
This section will discuss why understanding the difference between public and private is important, what public, semi-public, semi-private, and private places are, and what behaviors, conversations, and personal information are appropriate in each type of place.
So OR really spells it out, and I have their website linked here. It's really wonderful. I think this really speaks to something that in the autism community is what we call a hidden curriculum, that there are unspoken social rules in society that children pick up on as they age and as they go through puberty and as they get older, but nobody really ever says it directly. And for folks with autism, that can be really, really hard to just pick up on. That's not something that autistic kids just pick up on. And so we really have to be very explicit with them about what are things that we do in private and what are things that we can do in public. So before I go into consent, I wanted to put a quick slide in here. This is our gender-bred person. Just some terms that I wanted to introduce if they haven't already been introduced to you, because when we talk about attraction and when we talk about sex and when we talk about our identity, there are lots of new terms, and this might even be outdated in a few years, so I'll have to find a new image and re-record it. But you know, when we talk about our biological sex, that's male, female, right? Those are like the body parts that we are born with, right? But how we identify as a gender might be different, right? That's when you're talking about a transgender person, right? Our attraction, though, has nothing to do with our gender and doesn't really have much to do with our biological sex. Our attraction is who we're attracted to. Just like you might identify as, you know, a straight female, but you might still get an attraction to another female. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a lesbian. It just means that you have an attraction, and that's part of how you feel. That's what's in your heart. And then, of course, the expression is how we dress and how we put ourselves out in the world. So that's just a note on some of those terms that if you haven't heard, I guarantee you your children have heard. So it's good for you to brush up on them as well. Here is another quick video about people with disabilities, just reminding us all that just because somebody has a disability, whether it's autism or another type of disability, a physical disability, everybody can be and should be able to have a healthy and satisfying sexual and romantic relationship. A lot of times as parents, we have a hard time seeing that in our children. And if your child has a disability, you might have a really hard time anticipating that. You might be like, no, they're gonna be asexual, right? They're not gonna be attracted or not want to engage in any kind of sex. And that is often just not the case.
Great, so I'll see you at 7.
Hey Alex, was that about Young Inventors Club? Tonight I'm unveiling my latest creation, the pizza taco. It's gonna be incredible.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna tell you. I can't make it tonight. I'm actually going mini golfing with Jillian Peters.
Jillian Peters, student body president, first chair clarinet and stage band, 5th level warlock on our ongoing medieval role-playing campaign. She is so cool. I didn't even know you were into that.
Medieval role-playing games?
No, like, you know, dating. I mean, I hope it's okay to ask, but can your parts do stuff?
Actually, my parts work just fine. Just because I'm in a wheelchair, it doesn't mean I don't have crushes or feel attracted to people. In fact, no matter what our bodies can or can't do physically, people with disabilities have the same sexual and romantic feelings as anyone else.
And, like anyone else, people with disabilities have various sexual orientations and gender identities too. From heterosexual to gay, cisgender to trans, across a full spectrum of sexuality.
But are relationships more difficult for people with disabilities?
Well, regardless of my physical ability, I want the same things from a healthy relationship as everyone. Respect, communication, consent, and fun. And like everyone, I sometimes have questions about relationships, like how do I know if someone's interested in me? How do I ask someone out? Or how do I turn someone down if I'm not interested?
Putting yourself out there and trying to date can make anyone feel nervous or scared. But the more you educate and understand yourself and your own value, the better you'll get at feeling confident and making healthy decisions.
There are certain issues that people with disabilities could be more likely to face. Sometimes it can feel like parents are overprotective when it comes to dating. Or friends might not think of us in a romantic way because they don't understand that we have the same kinds of feelings. And there are some specific challenges that a person with disabilities might have to deal with. For example, if you had trouble communicating verbally, you'd have to find ways other than speech to express yourself or give consent, like using body language, adaptive devices, or pictures.
Think of it this way. Everyone's body is different and needs help from time to time. And regardless of a person's physical ability, they can have the same feelings, hopes, and dreams as anyone.
Thanks, guys. I think I get it now. Sorry I didn't understand before, Alex.
It's okay.
And you know what? I've got something that's gonna make your date with Jillian even more awesome. 1 New York-style soft-shell pepperoni and 1 hard-shell deep-dish bean blaster.
Thanks, but were those in your pockets?
Just since this morning.
Ew.
So moving on to consent, which is the more serious aspect of this topic. Consent is asking for permission. And again, I would hope that consent is something that we can start teaching our children from a very young age. About what do you do if somebody wants to hug you? What do you do if you go to a family member's home and everyone wants to hug and kiss grandma, but your child doesn't feel comfortable doing that? Consent is really a great topic to start having at a much younger age. So that way, by the time puberty comes, it can be a familiar topic that you're now just introducing into a new context. So consent when it comes to sex and when it comes to anything with our bodies is really important to talk about. How do I communicate this before I do something, but also how do I ask for consent while we're doing something? Because it's very important for your child to know that just because somebody said yes to a certain behavior once doesn't necessarily mean you have free range to do it all the time. And just because somebody invited you to touch them in a certain way doesn't mean that a minute later they can't change their mind and actually say, and I'm done, you know? So it's really important to give them some language to use, like expressing, I want to. Do you want to join me? Are you okay? Are you happy if we fill in the blank? And then while you're doing something, is this okay? Are you comfortable with this? Do you want me to stop? Do you want me to keep going further? So there's a real famous movie from the 90s about, comparing this to being an air traffic controller. You need constant updates. And it's really important to teach that to your children, that just because somebody said yes to sex or some kind of sexual activity doesn't mean that that's just your automatic green light until the very end. You really need to have a lot of communication along the way. And that obviously ties in with boundaries, right? With autism, boundaries and knowing unspoken desires and wants is really, really tricky. And so being able to recognize, is this person happy? Is this person uncomfortable? Is this person getting tense? Is this person feeling relaxed? Look for those body language cues. Is somebody coming closer to you? Is somebody turning their back to you? There's lots of little tiny signals that are very, very easy to miss. And so it's important for you to even say these things out loud in everyday actions. If your child is constantly, trying to get your attention and you're on the phone, but your body is telling them something else, that's a great way to point out, be like, what do you think my body is trying to tell you right now? I'm on the phone, I can't have a conversation with you, but what do you think I'm trying to communicate to you in unspoken ways? And this will help reinforce when they're in, a relationship or when they're dealing with any kind of bodily touching, that they can start to pick up on these signs and these cues. So declarative language versus imperative language. This is something that's really taught a lot in our SDI and our NEST program in the social development classes. Imperative language, as a reminder, is when you say something really directly, which is sometimes needed if there's like a safety issue, or, you know, if there's another reason to be super direct, right? But when it comes to crushes, when it comes to sex, when it comes to these kinds of things, you know, telling your child don't have sex, or telling your child, hey, stop staring, that might not really get you very far. It might help in the moment, but in the long run, you're not really going to be making the point that you want to be making with your child. And of course, asking them straight out, you know, who do you have a crush on, might just get you total radio silence. So it's really important to remember that using declarative language, which is a conversation style where you're really inviting a lot of sharing of your own, and really being curious about something out loud, almost like thinking out loud, is really going to be a great way to open up that conversation. So even saying something like, today I felt kind of embarrassed and actually a little surprised because I got my period and I didn't have a tampon. So you know what I did? And then you can kind of walk through like, well, I thought maybe I could do this, or I thought maybe I could do that. And it invites your child to see how you problem solved a situation about a topic that maybe they're about to go through or have gone through at school, right? Or instead of saying, who do you have a crush on? You can say, oh, you know, I noticed that you were staring at so-and-so after school. You know, it kind of invites more conversation to happen. And declarative language can really allow our child to hear our own thoughts, and it really helps them not only problem solve, but kind of self-regulate too, because they see you modeling it for them. And then of course, declarative language in a safe space, right? How do we create a safe space with it? And so here are some other talking points that you can use with your child to get them to talk openly about sex, right? And just a quick reminder, just because you're talking about sex doesn't mean you're condoning it free and open, right? Talking about it is actually being a really responsible parent, talking about it ahead of time. And so I just really want to relay that, you know, if you're listening to this workshop or if you're participating, you know, it means that you know that this is a really important topic. This is a really important aspect about being a human being. And our children look to us first. And if we don't open up the space for them to talk about these issues, they will talk about it in other spaces. They will look for the information and gather the information from other sources. And you really want to be one of the sources that they come to. So you want to be curious. I wonder how you would react if this happened, or if somebody said this to you, or let's just be curious about this, or let's think through the pros and cons, or just a quick reminder, no dumb questions here. What do you think oral sex is, right? Just kind of opening up these conversations, and you'll be really surprised to see how these kinds of phrases can get your child to open up and talk to you. So this is a book, it's a workbook, and it's a 5 is against the law. And it's using a 5-point scale. And 5-point scales are something that we use a lot with our artistic students, especially in the NEST program. And, you know, it really helps them have a visual of different behaviors and different kinds of responses. So, you know, looking from bottom up, you have informal. You have someone who's just kind of looking at someone that they like briefly, right? This is very typical and what we might consider normal behavior. Then you have a reasonable section, right? Where you're starting to develop a crush, and maybe you talk to the person at lunchtime, or maybe you sit next to them at lunchtime, or maybe you might volunteer to be in their group for a group project. You might want to talk to a trusted adult about this. You might want to journal about it, things like that, right? Very reasonable, very, very typical. So then things start to get like a little borderline, as we might say, staring at a person that you like without ever talking to them, right? Sometimes we don't notice that we're staring, but if it keeps happening over and over again, in class, in the hallway. Maybe you're just kind of staring and then they look at you and then there's nothing said. That could be awkward and can start to get a little borderline in how that person might behave because they can't read your thoughts and they can't read your mind. And so this is kind of like this phase where you might want to help your child realize their behavior might be starting to like teeter on a little bit of inappropriate behavior, or what might be perceived as number 4, scary, right? When you start maybe following somebody around the school, or maybe you even follow them home. You're just super curious about them. You just really are attracted to them and you just want to know everything about them. But if you're going out of your way, especially if you're following them after school, eek, that might be stalking, right? That might be creeping into some really scary behavior that might even be against the law, right? And of course, we have like the red zone, which is harmful behavior, which is when you might be touching somebody without their consent. You might be making comments about them on social media. It might really be a dangerous situation. And so that would be a 5. So this is actually a whole workbook. So I have it linked in the resources as well if folks are interested in more information about it. So now that we got through consent and through some of the really serious things, I wanted to put this slide in there because I think that self-determination, allowing our children to go out into the world and to have experiences and to try new things is really, really important. Obviously, at the age appropriate level that they're at, and depending on where they're at, and depending on what you're comfortable with too. But the word dignity of risk, or the phrase dignity of risk, is really acknowledging that every person has the right to take chances in life. They have the opportunity to make their own decisions, and then they have to basically live with the consequences, good or bad, about those decisions. Because even if they turn out to be bad decisions, they are informative and they help form that person's ability to then make another decision based on prior experience and prior knowledge. And that makes people who they are, is going out and having their own life experiences. And as parents, especially parents of folks with disabilities, have a tendency to be overprotective. And it's out of love and it's out of all of the warm, good things. But at some point we have to see where that balance is maybe holding our child back. You know, I see this a lot with transportation and riding public transportation, and when do parents make that move? You know, dignity of risk can even apply for folks, you know, older folks. You know, if you have parents or grandparents who continue to live on their own, this concept of allowing folks to age independently is a real conversation where you might not feel like somebody's safe living alone independently on their own, but you know, they really have the right to make those own decisions as they get older. And obviously as children, we're still parenting them, or their guardian, or their legal guardian. So we can still be making these decisions. But as children turn into adolescents, you'll see that you have less and less ability to control them. And you really are hoping to have this conversation and have built a trust with your child where you can think through these decisions, you can help them problem solve and make the best decisions they can make. And then a quick note on sexual health and mental health is that there's a real correlation between a child's mental health and if they are struggling with something going on in their sexual health. And so there's never I don't have a golden age about when you start talking about sex. Again, it's very developmentally appropriate when you have that conversation. And again, you want to incrementally increase the amount of information and the details and the sophistication of this conversation. But if a child perceives to have strong parental support with sex and with everything, it can really reduce symptoms of anxiety, depression, trauma, and it can really improve their overall quality of life. So thank you for listening to this so far, and thank you for joining this workshop, because you're taking the first step to making sure that you're supporting your child's overall health. And just another plug, as I said before, your kids have access to all sorts of information, even if you think you have, you know, all the right blockers on whatever devices they may have or may not have, they're still getting a lot of information from their peers, from social media, from everywhere. So please be one of those resources for your child so that they feel comfortable coming to you as a source of information. I know that there's a lot of typical gender roles where the dad might talk to the boys and the moms might talk to the girls. And I would just really encourage you to maybe push through that, because you'd really be surprised about who feels comfortable talking to who. And even if you're an aunt or an uncle or some other kind of guardian in a person's life, a big brother, a big sister, you never know which trusted adult a child will connect with and bond with over different topics. So please be that source for your kids in your life. And then, of course, my busy list of resources for everyone. On the left, there's NYU Nest workshops. These are free. These are public. So even if you're listening and you're like, what is the Nest program? I have no idea what that is. It doesn't matter. Nest has a ton of pre-recorded workshops like this on the topic of autism and something else. And that something else that I'm highlighting here are about relationships and sexuality, and also about navigating adolescence with Honey Schneider. I just listened to this one just recently and it was excellent. So there is a wealth of resources on the NYU Nest workshop page. So go to their page. I also linked Planet Puberty, an organization for autism research. And then something on the bottom left is a toolkit for boys and girls. It has lots of pictures and got some great info. And then on the right, I have a lot of LGBTQIA resources, and then some books. The Spectrum Girls Survival Guide is awesome. I have a few copies in my office. I know I've lent them out. And so it's very easy to read. It's a great book. So I will leave it there. There's a lot of information. Please feel free to reach me if you have any questions, or if I can, help work through any kind of issue or concern that you or your child might have. And again, I really thank you for taking the time to listen, to participate, and to think through this topic. It's vast. There's a lot of information out there. And it's just a great thing to be available to the children in our life at different phases as they work their way through this part about being a human being. It's really important. So thank you very much.